When is the last time you did something crazy? I don't mean use the restrooms at Taco Bell crazy. I mean something that's a little bit dangerous. Rapid heartbeat, sweaty palms, shortness of breath, that kind of crazy. When was the last time you did something that was both exhilarating and terrifying all at the same time?
Hey, you must be Kyle.
Yes.
I'm Holly.
Holly, nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
David Berry.
David, nice to meet you.
Me too.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I'm here to ride a bull. I've never done anything like that before in my life.
You came to the right place.
I think of it like this. It's a little bit like having me ride a bull. I don't even own a pair of cowboy boots. I've never ridden a mechanical bull in my life. I don't remember the last time I was on a bike. For me, riding a bull is crazy.
I think the first thing you need to know is you can die doing this.
Now, we use the word crazy to describe something that doesn't just not make sense, but in fact goes in the opposite direction of what does make sense. So for me, that's riding a bull. I mean, the closest thing I had to a pet growing up was a goldfish that was especially tame, I might add. I don't think it makes sense for anyone to ride a bull, but for me, it is the opposite of what makes sense. It goes against my nature, it goes against my character, it goes against my life experience. I'm not a bull rider. I'm a book reader. I am a web surfer. I am a TV watcher. I don't ride bulls. It is in the opposite direction of my comfort level and of who I am and what I've learned to do over the years. And so as we listen to Jesus teach this Sermon on the Mount, here's what we'll find. We'll find that he calls us to something that feels completely contrary to our nature. It feels completely different than who we are and what we naturally would want to do. And as we listen to his sermon, we won't be able to keep ourselves from thinking from time to time, yeah, this is a little bit crazy. We're standing in, what is this called?
This is the arena, the bullpen.
Okay, so this is where the bulls buck.
This
Okay.
is,
And the ground is hard, but it's not,
it's as deep as we could get it.
it's deep, so it's as soft as you can make
Yeah.
dirt.
We're gonna go out here and then they're gonna bring them down a little bit, like your way.
I'm trying to find one. I'm trying to find one that I feel good about. I don't know what those numbers are on the back, but it's like victims. Is that what that is? How you doing? I'm Kyle.
Jared Martin.
Jared
Call me
Martin.
Slim.
I call you Slim.
Yep.
Okay. Good. You're gonna ride a bull?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to watch you. I'm gonna take some notes,
All right.
but I know that I'll just be trying to hang on more than anything. I'm pretty sure he just landed on his head. And my strategy thus far has been not to think about it. And that made it really difficult not to think about it.
Whew. When he comes out, it's going to happen fast. It's going to be a blur to you.
Yeah.
Okay? And you're going to feel all this power moving away from you.
And that's where I'm leaning forward. Okay.
And then the bull's going to drop and kick. And that's where you lean back.
Okay.
The only thing is try not to lean back. Okay. Try to keep straight and just kind of your belly and your chest out.
Okay.
Not leaning back.
Another thing you might say to yourself as you listen to the sermon of Jesus is, that's a little bit dangerous. As Jesus preaches this sermon, he describes what could really only be called a dangerous adventure. In fact, it seems to me that it might be appropriate to attach some warnings to his teaching. And so maybe you say, warning, following Jesus may be dangerous to your relationships. Because Jesus talks a lot about honesty and integrity. He says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. You do what you say you're going to do. You are who you say you are. And that's all fine and good until you go back to class and you're the only one of your friends who isn't cheating on the test. Or you're the only one of your friends who walks out of the movie at the theater. Then it gets a little bit dangerous. Or you respond to the person who hurt you or took advantage of you, not with bitterness and anger, but you turn the other cheek and you extend grace and forgiveness. That's dangerous. Or warning, following Jesus may be dangerous to your financial status and your career aspirations, because Jesus said things like, don't store up for yourself treasures here on earth, but store up for yourself treasures in heaven. Jesus said, don't look at a woman lustfully, and it's a little bit dangerous to go to a friend and to say, I have really been struggling with pornography. You see, it's really not that dangerous to go to church once a week and to sing some songs and to listen to a sermon, but to actually follow Jesus, that's dangerous. There are some things in life that if you're gonna do them, you better go all in. There's some things in life you can't kind of do. You can't kind of get married. You can't kind of have a baby. You can't kind of go skydiving, and you can't kind of ride a bull. If you're gonna do it, you better do it. And here's what becomes clear as we study the Sermon on the Mount is that you can't kind of follow Jesus. Because Jesus is going to address about every area of your life. He's going to address your relationships and your finances. He's going to address your thought life and your sexuality. He's going to address how you spend your time and how you use your talents. He's going to address your hands and your eyes. Everything is on the table. And so the question is, will you go all in? You see, there comes a point where you can't just keep talking. And you can't just keep watching. At some point, you either get on the bull and ride it, or you just go home.
Is about right yet? Right like that?
My prayer is that in the next few days, many of you would have this honest moment with Jesus and that you would go all in, because there comes a point where you just have to decide if you're going to go for it or not. A lot of us are afraid of making that kind of commitment. We're afraid of what we might miss out on by going all in. We're afraid of what might be required of us if we really commit to it. And so we try to walk the line and not get too carried away. We want a little bit of Jesus, but not too much. We want to follow him closely enough to be associated with him, but not so close that it requires anything from us. But listen to me. This life is short. It's only a breath, really. It's like an 8-second ride if you're lucky. And Jesus says at the end of the Sermon on the Mount that one day each of us will be standing before God. That before you know it, the buzzer will sound, and that day will be here for every one of us. So yeah, it is. It's a little bit crazy. It's a little bit dangerous. But in the end, it's worth it. So hang on tight, give it all you've got, and enjoy the ride.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Glad you was here and we enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm gonna go crawl up in a fetal position. Thanks.
Cowboy up.
Yeah. No. It's too late for that. You can't clap now because you were laughing when I almost died. So your tears mean nothing to me. My wife kind of grew up around all of that, right? And so I thought when I showed it to her, I thought she's gonna think, he's awesome. And I showed it to her and she laughed so long and so hard that she was crying and she couldn't breathe. It's not really the response I was looking for, but that is something that is way out of my comfort zone, right? It goes against my nature. It goes against what feels intuitively right to me. It is something that is in the opposite direction of what I would normally choose to do. Now, for some of you, as we talk about following Jesus, and as we go through these Beatitudes and discuss the Sermon on the Mount, a lot of it is going to feel the same way. It's going to feel very contrary to what feels right to you or to what you've been taught or what our culture tries to influence us with. When Jesus talks about the fact that you're blessed if you're poor in spirit, you're blessed when you mourn, you're blessed when you quit trying to pretend like you've got it all together and admit that you need help, that doesn't come naturally. Jesus takes what we think about happiness and he turns it upside down and he calls us to live by a completely different set of values. And at first it's a little bit scary and a little bit dangerous because it just doesn't seem to fit in to what we feel comfortable with. And so we're finishing up this series called The End of Me. This week's message is entitled The End of My Comfort Zone. And what we're going to find is that we have a comfort zone. But right outside of our comfort zone is oftentimes God's blessing. But for many of us, we never really experience that blessing because we want to be safe, we want to be secure, we want to be comfortable. But it's just on the other side of your comfort zone that you will often experience the blessing of God. And so as we finish up the Beatitudes, this introduction to the Sermon on the Mount, here's what Jesus says in Matthew 5, verses 10 through 11. He says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Jesus says, look, you're blessed if you're living your life in such a way that you're so far out of your comfort zone that other people are uncomfortable. And that you run the risk of being persecuted and insulted and being lied about because that's how radically you're following Jesus. You're blessed in that moment. So Jesus comes along and he defines a blessed life very differently than how we would. We would tend to say we're blessed and we measure it by our level of comfort. Don't you think that's true? That we use comfort as a gauge to determine whether or not we're living a blessed life? In fact, I would say our entire economy is based upon this. If you just pay attention to the commercials, look at it through this lens, you'll find that more often than not, things are advertised to you and to me as something that will make your life easier and more comfortable. So you watch the commercials and you've got a minivan and they advertise that there's like 8 cup holders in this minivan. Or an airline announces that they've added an entire 4 inches of legroom to the coach seating area. Or I was reading about this new Lazy Boy recliner that has a refrigerator built into the side. It's like God himself designed this. It's just, you just open it up and there's your drink right there. If they could somehow turn that into a toilet as well, I mean, you'd never have to get up. You would just, it's just so comfortable. And there's something about us that's how we define what it means to live a blessed life. We want to just relax, grab a drink, kick back. And so Jesus makes it clear that, look, the blessed life is not always going to be the easy life. It's not just, flying first class and being waited upon at 5-star restaurants and sleeping on a memory foam mattress and getting regular massages. He says, no, look, a blessed life is a life where you're living far enough outside of here that there is a risk of persecution
and insults and being lied about. And so you just see this consistently in Scripture, that when people step outside of their comfort zone, they put themselves in a place where they can be blessed by God. So you have Noah. Well, Noah couldn't keep his comfortable, normal life and be obedient to what God had called him to in building the ark at the same time. He had to leave the comfort zone, and he was ridiculed and he was mocked, but there was a blessing for him. And we read about Moses, who couldn't stay on the backside of the desert herding sheep for his father-in-law, and at the same time go with God, follow God to help free the slaves out of Egypt. He had to leave his comfort zone in order to be used by God. But there was a blessing. He had to leave the comfort zone, but there was a blessing on the other side of it. Or you think about Esther going before the king, and she could be killed by going before the king uninvited. But she said, if I perish, I perish. And she leaves her comfort zone. And there's a blessing there. And we just see this is true. If you look at the disciples that Jesus calls, they leave behind their fishing nets, or they leave behind the tax collector's booth and a profitable business in order to follow Jesus. And they find that on the other side of their comfort zone is a blessing that they never would have experienced had they stayed in their comfort zone. And so here's your comfort zone. Here's God's blessing so many times. And so maybe you hear that and you think, well, okay, fair enough. I need to be pushed a little bit. I need to step out of my comfort zone. But I don't even know where the boundaries are. I don't really know where the lines are. I would say for some of you, the fact that you're here right now, you are outside of your comfort zone. And I hope that you find God's blessing in being here. Because I know for some of you, you've come here by yourself. You don't really know anybody. And that takes a lot of courage to just come to a church where you don't really know anybody, but you've been obedient to God and you followed him here. It's not an accident that you're here. But for others of you, you're not sure where the lines are. How do you know where your comfort zone ends? Well, here's how you know. It's really not that hard. Fear will tell you when you're getting close. That's how you know. When you start to get scared, that means you're probably getting to the end of your comfort zone. And so here's the question I'd like for us to just kind of think through together. When was the last time following Jesus produced fear in me? When is the last time that following Jesus produced fear in me? Because there is something wrong if I'm following Jesus and fear is never a factor and courage never needs to be called upon. One way you know that you are following Jesus is that he always does this. He leads you out of his comfort zone, or out of our comfort zone. It's what he does. But most of us, we want to follow Jesus, but we want to stay in our comfort zone. Well, you can do one or the other, but you can't do both. One of my favorite places to speak at different times is in our local state prisons. And most recently, I was visiting a prison. I love to talk to the inmates and just kind of hear their stories. And I noticed this guy passionately worshiping. And I was just moved by his worship because he just looked like this very big, intimidating guy. You could tell he had lived a pretty rough life, and he just like kind of this big biker guy with tattoos up his arms and his neck and a shaved head, and he was just worshiping God. But he's the kind of guy that you just instinctively know you shouldn't make eye contact with, right? I mean, you just feel like you should look down when he's looking in your direction. Or if you see him walking across the street, you don't mean any offense by it, but you just find yourself going to the other side. It's kind of a scary looking guy. And so I was talking to him afterwards, and he said, "Can I ask you a question?" I'm like, "Yes, sir." And he told me that he was in for murder, that he had killed a man. He'd shot and killed a man. And but he said that he hadn't been in church since he was a little kid, but for 7 years before he was arrested and incarcerated, for 7 years, he lived directly across the street from a church. And he said that in those 7 years, not one time did a person from the church introduce themselves to him. He would be out in his driveway working on his motorcycle, and people would come into church, and he noticed that they would intentionally look away, kind of pull their kids in a little bit closer. Not one time in 7 years did someone walk across the street and invite him to come back with them to church. And so his question was this. He said, "Why didn't somebody just tell me about Jesus? Why didn't somebody tell me about Jesus?" And I thought that he was I thought this is where it was going, right? But I thought he was making a point.
And then I realized he didn't know. Like, he was not being judgmental or condemning that this church didn't reach out to him. He was wounded and was trying to make sense of how that could have happened. How do you live 7 years across the street from a church and nobody says hi? And so he wanted to know. And I said, they were afraid. They were afraid. And I may have been too. And there's something within us. Yeah, we want to go to church, we want to follow Jesus, but we don't want to cross the street. We don't want to step out of our comfort zone. We want to follow Jesus and be in our comfort zone, and you can't do both. So in Luke 9, Jesus says that if you're going to follow him, you take up a cross and you deny yourself and follow him. That's the opposite of comfort. Comfort says you spoil yourself. Jesus says you deny yourself. Comfort says you sit and relax. Jesus says you get up and you follow, and you take a cross with you. But at the end of that chapter, we read about a man who approaches Jesus as he's traveling with his disciples, and he wants to follow Jesus. Verse 57, it says, as they were walking along the road, a man said to Jesus, I will follow you wherever you go. Here's the word, wherever, meaning there's no zone, right? Wherever you go, that's where I'll follow you. There's no boundaries, there's no borders. Wherever you go, I'll go. And Jesus says, verse 58, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He says, I'll follow you wherever. And Jesus says, okay, well, I hope you're not especially attached to beds, because where I'm going, there's no place to lay your head. And suddenly we find that this man is kind of stepping back from his commitment. Why? Because he wanted to follow Jesus. And then Jesus said, well, here's where I'm going. And the man wanted to stay in his comfort zone. He didn't want to step outside of that. And here's what I think is happening for all of us in one degree or another, is that Jesus is pushing you outside of your comfort zone. He's calling you to do something that doesn't feel safe. It feels a little bit dangerous, and it feels a little bit crazy. I don't know what it is for you, because it's different based on how long you've been following Jesus, but I know for some of you, He's calling you to follow him in your own home. Even in your own home, it's out of your comfort zone. It's out of your comfort zone to submit. Like, that's just hard for you. A lot of different reasons for it, but it's hard for you to let somebody else have any kind of control over your life. Or it's out of your comfort zone to be a spiritual leader in your own home. I mean, just the thought of praying out loud with your wife or with your kids, it's a little intimidating, or talking to them about what God is doing in your life or what he's teaching you. For some of you, maybe the comfort zone that he's calling you out of, maybe that's in your neighborhood. You're just not naturally the kind of person who goes over and introduces themselves, and that's out of your comfort zone to try to work Jesus into a conversation. And you're afraid what people will say, and maybe they'll talk behind your back. And Jesus says, well, if they do, you're blessed. You're blessed. Or maybe it says you go back to school, students, and you know, it's out of your comfort zone to have a Bible with you. Or it's out of your comfort zone to say a prayer before lunch, or to reach out to the kid that nobody's really friends with. And you're afraid if you do some of those things, people are going to start avoiding you too. And you don't want to be the weird religious kid in school. And you're afraid that what people might say or how people might talk about you. And Jesus says, well, if they do that, you're blessed. There is a blessing for you in that. Maybe for some of you, it is at work. You have worked at the same place for years, and they don't even know you're a Christian because you don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. But what I know is that it's no accident. You work where you work with the people you work with. Jesus has put you in their life for a purpose. And maybe you step out in faith, and it's scary. I get that. It's scary. And maybe they don't respond well. I mean, worst case scenario, maybe you get fired. Well, you're blessed. You're blessed if that's what happens. And so Jesus kind of turns upside down how many of us feel about comfort and happiness. Mark Batterson tells about a band of brave men and women who became known as one-way missionaries in the 1800s. And they would buy a one-way ticket to wherever they were going to go be a missionary. But instead of packing their belongings in a suitcase, they would pack their belongings in a coffin. And they would go knowing that they wouldn't come back. And so they would ship everything over inside their own coffin. And specifically, one missionary by the name of A.W. Milne
went to an island in the South Pacific, knowing full well that the headhunters who lived on that island had martyred every missionary before him. But he didn't fear for his life because, his life had already come to an end. He'd already died to himself. And so with his coffin packed, he headed out. He spent 35 years living among the people of this tribe. And when he died, the tribe members buried him in the middle of their village, and they put this epitaph on his tombstone. When he came, there was no light, and when he left, there was no darkness. See, I don't know when it happened, but at some point, we started to think that we could follow Jesus and be comfortable at the same time. At some point, we thought, oh, these things can go together. No, they can't. I don't know when it happened, but at some point, we started to think that we could follow Jesus and not have to do anything dangerous, that we could just, not do hard things, and we could play it safe. That is not how it works. And maybe as a church, we are partly responsible for this, because I tell you, we get caught up sometimes, and we want you to be comfortable, and we get concerned if the service goes a little bit too long, and we want to make sure everything is as comfortable as possible for you. And maybe somewhere along the lines, we've just developed this mentality that being a follower of Jesus means that I have rights to comfort, that because I follow Jesus, that I'm supposed to be comfortable. It is the opposite. And if you follow Jesus, he's going to lead you out of your comfort zone. You can follow Jesus, or you can stay in your comfort zone. You can't do both.